There's a minhag before Rosh Hashanah to send people greetings. You send Rosh Hashanah cards. You wish people, why? Why for Rosh Hashanah should you send Rosh Hashanah cards? For Pesach, you don't send Pesach cards. For Sukkot, we don't send Sukkot cards. For Shavuos, we don't send Shavuos cards. Why for Rosh Hashanah do we send out greetings? We'll understand that from our Gemara, which deals with the meaning of a year and how time can dilute impact. Avodah Zarah, Daf Lamed Daled Amud Aleph. Kanim shel Akum La'achar Yudbet Chodesh Mutarim. You've heard of the thing that comes up. It often comes up. I have a dinner service. I don't remember if it's milk or meat. Haven't used it for years. It used to belong to my granny. Not sure if she used it for milk or meat. Hasn't been used for years. Can you use it? Sometimes it might have been treif even. Not even sure it was used for kosher, but it hasn't been used for years. And there are these discussions in halacha. And this sugya really deals with one of the main sugyas that deals with that issue. Rabbi Akiva ikla leginzak. Rabbi Akiva came to a place called Ginzak, which was very far from where the Jews were concentrated in Bavel. And in Gemara Tainis, we have the same Gemara, and there it says Mar Ukva, not Rabbi Akiva. And Tosfos on our pages, it's more likely that it was Mar Ukva than that it was Rabbi Akiva. And Bol Minei, they asked him 3 questions. One of the questions that they ask him is whether Kankanim shel Ovdei Kochavim Asurim or Mutarim. Whether the containers, the jugs and cans that the non-Jews have used can be used for kosher, for using for kosher. We'll see from the continuation what exactly the question is. V'hilchata, the Gemara then answers that it was interesting that Mar Ukva or Rabbi Akiva, according to the Giz that we have here, didn't know the answer to the 3 questions. And he went back to the Beis HaMedrash and he discussed it with his colleagues and resolved it. In the case of these utensils that have been used by non-Jewish people, Hilchata Kankanim shel Ovdei Kochavim La'achar Yudbet Chodesh Mutarim. That these utensils of the non-Jew, if they haven't been used for 12 months, they're mutar. They can be used. We're talking specifically about the kelim of yain nesech, that they've been used for wine. We're talking about wine utensils particularly. So these are these jugs and carafes and containers of wine, and they haven't been used for 12 months. Can a Jewish person use them? And the halacha is yes. Says Rashi, לאחר 12 חודש mutarim miyad bli tikun. You don't have to do anything else. You can just, as it is, you don't have to clean them out. You don't have to do anything. You can use them as they are. If you want to use them before the 12 months are up, then we've had in the previous sugya that you've got to do the process, which you've also seen done and referred to many times, particularly for Pesach with glassware, where you fill it, you soak it in water for 24 hours, you change the water, soak it for another 24 hours, change the water, soak it for another 24 hours. That's called irui, and that's the way you can use these particular types of kelim in less than 12 months. But if it's after 12 months, you don't even have to do this. You can just use them right away. Says the Shulchan Aruch, Kol HaKelim Sheyishanan Yud Bet Chodesh Shari Shebevadai Kala Kol Lachluchit Yain Shebahem. Based on the Rishonim, the Shulchan Aruch paskins, because the Lachluchit Yain has disappeared already. Lachluchit means the moisture of the wine. Why is that important? In other words, there's a suggestion, there's still chemical there, there's still something there, there's still material, that these are kelim that have been used. They could be pottery kelim, they're not glass and they're not enamel, they could just be normal earthenware kelim. So they've certainly absorbed wine over the years of usage by the non-Jew. So they've been absorbing wine that isn't kosher, that is yain nesach or stam yainam. And after 12 months, what happens to that? Does it just disappear? No, it says the Shulchan Aruch lachluchit yain shebahem. The moisture of the wine has disappeared. And the Rashba says, a very important Rashba here, that ze pashut od delo sagi yishun elo b'klei yain. This only applies to wine. This doesn't apply to dinner services, and this doesn't apply to pots and pans. This only applies to kelim that have used for wine. B'yain dafke svara shekala lachluchit. This idea that the moisture of the wine has disappeared after 12 months, you can say that with wine, you can't say that with other kelim. Now, not everybody agrees with the Rashba, and there's a lot of discussion. There's an important Chacham Tzvi. We'll learn part of it in a moment. There's a tshuva of Reb Moshe Feinstein in the first Chelik of Yoredeh that is like 10 pages long, where he goes into this issue. So it's enormously complex. And I was learning through this, one gets drawn into the halachic complexity of it. The problem is one can't deal with the halachic complexity of it in 20 minutes. So at the end, what we have to do is get to the essence of one particular element of it that is important in order to understand this halakha completely. And we get that from the Chacham Tzvi. And again, whether the Chacham Tzvi is relied on for halacha or not in this particular case, that's a whole different issue. And if you ever have a shaila about whether something that hasn't been used for 12 months can be used, make sure that you ask a competent Rav or Posek, a Moira Hara, because it's complicated. There are times where one can find a way to be matter where one can allow it, but there are also times that can't take place, and one has to really go into it very, very carefully and understand not only the halachas and not only the facts of the case. When was it used? How long was it used? What was it used for? But also one has to understand the circumstances of the shaila, because that can affect the outcome of the answer. The Chacham Tzvi was asked about a Pesach situation where a particular kelim had been used for chometz 2 years before Pesach, and they hadn't been used since then. And the question was whether they could be used. And in the process of reasoning, the Chacham Tzvi makes a really important distinction between the principle of noisen tam lifgam and yud beis chodesh. Let me explain. Noisen tam lifgam is if you have a vessel, a utensil, that hasn't been used for 24 hours. So we know that in many cases, if by mistake you cooked in that vessel or you used that vessel, the food is kosher. The vessel can't be used, the vessel is not kosher, but the food is kosher. And the reason for that is because of tam lifgam, because when food has been absorbed in a container for 24 hours, been absorbed in the sides of the container, in the material of the container, after 24 hours, the food doesn't give off a pleasant taste. So you're not eating the food itself. The food is absorbed in the pot, in the sides of the pot, in the metal or in the pottery. You're not eating the actual food. What's the problem? You're getting benefit from the taste of the tray food. But the taste after 24 hours is not a pleasant taste, so you're not getting any benefit from that. So that's called noisen tam lifgam. And b'di'evid, in many cases, noisen tam lifgam will be mutar. The Chacham Tzvi argues that the status of that taste after 12 months is different. This is not about noisen tam lifgam, because the whole issue in his shaila on Pesach, noisen tam lifgam doesn't help you. If you've got chometz, which is noisen tam lifgam, it's still problematic. So they want to say in the case that he's asked about this particular container or dinner service that hadn't been used for 24 months, but even if it's noisen tam lifgam on Pesach, this will still be a problem. Bearing in mind that Chacham Tzvi was, apart from being an enormous Talmud Chacham, is the father of Rabbi Yaakov Emden in the 17th century. He was also a very active Rav in Kehillas. He was the Rav in Amsterdam for many years and managed the Rabbonos, both of the Sephardi and the Ashkenazi communities there, quite uniquely, quite unusually. Later on, he was in London, he was in other parts of Europe. He had to deal with modern shilas at that time, with regular people who had regular shilas, and one sees from his shilas and shuvas, one understands the world in which he lives. So let's learn through parts of it, because the principles here are important. And he says, this object, this pot or this container that was used for treif, or it was used for chometz, more than 12 months before this time, the food is still in it. That doesn't disappear anywhere. But nevertheless, reicham pag v'ta'amam namer, the fragrance, the aroma, and the taste of the food is no longer there. Ve'en bahem ta'am klal, and they have no taste at all. So you've got chemicals basically that are absorbed in the side of the pot that don't give out any taste at all. Even if you've got dregs of non-kosher wine on the side of a barrel, after 12 months, those dregs are mutter. You don't even have to worry about the dregs that are in it. You don't even have to clean that out because they have no taste. They give off no taste. Because all the moisture of that wine has been dried up, it's disappeared, it's evaporated, and now it's just dust. Of course, this links in also to the whole question of, is there a point at which treif content used to produce a chemical, and it's just a chemical, it doesn't have any taste to it, it doesn't do anything, is that still also in it? We've got the questions with gelatin and all the different chemicals that they now use in foods that are so problematic. This borders on that whole issue as well, that if it's a chemical that actually has no impact on the food, now of course if the food industry is putting it into the food, it's because it does have impact. That's the problem. If it was just a chemical and it didn't have impact on the food, it wouldn't be a problem because it doesn't do anything. It's so interesting that in kashrus, just notice this because it will come to the closing point of the shir, that in kashrus it's the impact of the food more than the food. That if you're eating something which is treif but has no impact, it's not treif. And here you've got a good example of it. It's about the ta'am, it's about the taste, it's about whether it's mamid, whether it affects the way the food comes together, whether it binds the food or it solidifies the food. It's what impact it has on the food and on the eating experience. If it has no impact on the eating experience, it's not treif. That's not food. That's just kafra ba'alma, as he says. That's sand. You can eat sand. And if with real substance, like these dregs on the side of the barrel, we've said that after 12 months, that it's just like dust, it has no impact. Certainly, if there's something treif contained in the side of the pot, but after 12 months, it has no impact, you can't taste it, it has no effect on the eating experience, that won't be a problem. He brings a rashbo and so on, and he proves from that rashbo, now we come to an interesting thing. So what happens if you put something which is charif, something which is very hot, very spicy, into this container? So the din with noten tam lifgam, if this pot is stood for more than 24 hours, and you cooked kosher soup in this treif pot, but there's been 24 hours in between, the soup is still kosher. But if the soup has a lot of spice in it, it isn't, because the spice reinforces and gives pleasant taste to that taste of gum. That's what spices do. So even though the taste in the pot is not a nice taste, it's 24 hours old, by spicing it up, it now becomes a taste that you can gain access, and it does affect the eating experience. Says the Chacham Tzvi, that's only with noisen tam lifgam, on the 24-hour time period. But in the case of the 24-hour time period, it doesn't matter if the food is spicy. In this case, if you're starting with a treif pot that hasn't been used for 12 months, for a year it hasn't been used, and now you cook spicy soup in it, that will not be a problem. Why? Because this is leka time aklal. This is not noisen tam lifgam. The Chacham Tzvi brilliantly differentiates between tam lifgam. It has a foul taste, and it has no taste. A foul taste can still be problematic because you can salvage a foul taste. Every cook knows that. If you've made a mess of your dish, sometimes you can still fix it up with flavoring and with spices. But no taste, there's nothing you can do. If you put salt on something that has no taste, all you'll taste is the salt. With spices, you'll only taste the spice. You won't be able to arouse the original flavor again. The only time we say that something hot and spicy can reignite the taste that was negative, that was unpleasant before, that's if there was taste, but it was lifgam, it was negative taste, it wasn't pleasant. But if there is no taste, if it's completely tasteless, not only does a hot dish not reignite the flavor, but even if you're actually eating the thing itself, since it has no taste, it isn't treif. Something that has no impact, that doesn't influence the eating experience in any way at all, isn't treif at all. And whether you add flavor into it and hot spice into it, whatever you do to it, you cannot re-arouse the treifness of it. It's nothing, it's just a chemical, says the Chacham Tzvi. And then he says very beautifully, even though I don't have the strength of mind, I don't have almost the chutzpah to allow one to cook in non-Pesach. Imagine where this could go to. You could now use chometznike kelim on Pesach if they're more than 12 months old. He says, I'm not going to go that far. But if somebody did happen to cook something in a pot that hasn't been used for 12 months, I will allow absolutely that food to be eaten on Pesach. It won't be considered chometz, says the Chacham Tzvi. What's so interesting to me is what a year is, what a year does. And 11 months? No, 11 months doesn't work. It's got to be 12 months. The poskim say 12 months, it's 12 lunar months. It's 29 and a half days times 12. That's the measure of time. 12 lunar months go apart. This idea of 12 months, it's not just a physical thing. It's not just a scientific thing. That after 12 months, exactly this has no impact. It's the nature of a year. It's the nature of a year from a Kabbalistic sense, from an emotional sense, from a human sense, and from a physical sense. A year dilutes. A year dilutes impact. Does it dilute the food? No, says the Chacham Tzvi, the food is still in the pot. Whatever it was there is still in the sides of the pot. What isn't there is the effect of the food. And that gives us a sense, because one often understands that the principles, when you're dealing with foundational principles in halacha, those are the same foundational principles as you'll find in all sorts of other areas of life and of Torah. And so it's a foundational principle in life that a year dilutes impact. It's still there, the thing is still there, but the impact is diluted. Where do we have an example from that? We have an example in the Gemara Brachos. Omer Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, haro'eh et chavero la'achar 30 yom, omer baruch shechianu v'kibenu v'yiganu lazman hazeh. If you see somebody you haven't seen for 30 days, you say a shechianu. Nobody said a shechianu when I came back from overseas and I was away for more than 30 days. La'achar 12 chodesh, but if it's more than 12 months, omer baruch mechayeh ha'metim. The Baruch Hashem that He has revived the dead. What a strange bracha to say for somebody who's been living healthily just in another part of the world, and you see him after 12 months. Omar Rav, Ein hamet mishtakeach min halev ela la'achar 12 chodesh. A dead person only gets forgotten after 12 months. The impact lasts 12 months. It's not that the person is as dead after 13 months as he was after 10 months. There's no difference in the person's remains. That's not the point. It's the impact. After 12 months, you lose impact. After 12 months, you lose connection. Something that isn't done regularly, that isn't done every year, you lose. And that's why we have Yom Tovim every year. If a year would go by without a Pesach or without a Shavuos or without a Sukkot, that would be a problem. The impact has to be reignited annually. More than a year goes by, it locks the memory up in a place where it's hard to access it again. Shene'amar, David Amer says, it's so sad what David Amer says, Nishkachti kamet milev. I'm concerned that I will be forgotten like a dead person. Hayiti kikli oved, I could be like a disposable piece of utensil that nobody will even remember who I am. And says Rashi, v'stam kli la'achar 12 chodesh mishtakeach min halev. If you lose something, an ordinary thing, we're not talking about losing a golden Rolex, but you lose an ordinary thing, an Apple Watch. After 12 months, you get over it. The impact is gone. What's the difference between 12 months and not? You've lost it. The financial measures are the same. You had something that was worth $400 and now you don't have that thing that's worth $400. What's the difference if it was 12 months ago or now? It's nishtakach min halev. The Yeush Baalim la'achar 12 chodesh, because the Yeush Baalim is an owner gives up after 12 months. Shematzu kli or shum metziach chayav lachrish shalosh regalim v'nimtza achar hasukot tzarich lamtin u'lachris b'pesach v'atzeret u'v'chag. For a year, you've got to try and find the owner of lost property. Dainu 12 chodesh. V'shuv en tzarich lachriz. After that, you don't have to go crazy trying to find the person anymore, because he's given up hope at that. After 12 months, we give up hope. That's why it's so important to understand the value of renewal in less than a year, of annual renewal and not less than that. So we send one another greetings before Rosh Hashanah so that a year shouldn't go by that you haven't seen the person and is nishtakach min halev. You remind the person that although we haven't seen each other for a while, I remember you, you're important to me, you're valuable to me. If you miss a year, I'm sure you've had the experience. You don't send letters out 1 year, or you don't send to a particular person. The following year, it's even harder to reignite that relationship, because the impact, whether of things or of people, of memories or events, only lasts for 12 months.